Chewie.
A little.
The season finale of Star Wars The Bad Batch, entitled Kamino Lost, I felt like this was a very strong episode to end the season on. I think it worked as the conclusion of the finale. I think that the second half of the season built a lot of momentum to get to this point. I actually like the fact that it focused exclusively on the Bad Batch too.
I disagree. I didn't like this episode. I think that the previous episode was far better, and I think I know why. This episode did have action, but they were escaping, and that was the type of action. In the previous episode, they were fighting the Empire. I like that action more than them escaping.
I get that, but I feel like this is where it had to end because it was very focused on the Bad Batch. Crosshair was in the episode, and they were focusing on what was going to happen and how his interaction with them would come out. I like that the beginning of this episode kind of came right out of the end of the last episode where the Empire is bombarding the planet. And I like that the clone that was giving the report to Admiral Rampart seemed sad that they had destroyed the city of Kamino and it was sinking into the sea. But once the Empire left, you could feel how the Bad Batch were just all by themselves on this lonely planet, sinking to the bottom of the sea and trapped. And I felt like that was a really good setup for this story.
I do agree a little bit with that. Actually, when the Empire left, I felt like this was a little bit unbelievable, this episode. Because when the Empire left, spoiler alert, Omega and Crosshairs are stuck in this room which is flooding with water. And the other part of the Bad Batch with Hunter and Wrecker, they're trying to open the door. And they open the door about this much, and Omega and Crosshairs and the droid come out. I think Shortcut is his name.
Oh,
or Easy.
Easy. Yeah, something like that.
I don't know. I don't know why I said Shortcut. But
I actually like that name. Maybe they should do a droid named Shortcut. That's kind of a good name.
But I thought that was a little bit unbelievable, and there were a couple of other things that were unbelievable too.
I'll give you that. They only opened the door a slight amount, and they were able to slide right through that little amount. And also the fact that they could close the doors with that amount of water pressure on the other side, I question that. I guess I suspended my disbelief for that because I was so into how are they going to get out of the city. I knew it would have to go back to that underwater tunnel, but I didn't know how they were going to get there. I like every step that they took in many ways, but I also like the fact that Crosshair was along for the ride in some ways, but he also had to be a willing party to the escape. And they didn't take the obvious route with him. Even there were a couple times where he did things that were redeemable, I guess, for his character. And yet at the end of the episode, it didn't go the way I thought it would, the obvious, easy way. They kept this animosity between him and Clone Force 99 in this divide. And I really liked that they did that. I like how they ended the episode. A lot, actually.
I agree with you about Crosshairs. I did like how he was in this episode, and he played a pretty big role. I disagree with you by how they ended it. I actually wanted to see Crosshairs the way he had been with the Republic, but if Crosshairs went with them, what that would be like.
Now that's the thing. Throughout the course of the episode, he gained, the last couple episodes actually, I felt sympathy for his character. Something I thought I would never do because he was so cruel and did such awful things in the episodes prior to this. I never thought I could have any sympathy for the character. And yet, he was able to pull sympathy from me. And throughout the course of this episode, like you, I wanted him to go with them. But when he didn't, I was really impressed with the bold choice that they made, and I found, this is interesting. Now I have sympathy for an enemy character. And will I be able to sustain that? What will happen in the future? So I think this is setting up because I wonder if I'm looking at this much in the same way that Omega or Hunter or even Wrecker might look at Crosshairs. Like, he's doing these awful things, but I still want him to come back. And I think this story arc provided that for me.
That's actually a very good point. I did not think about that. And I think you're right. I do feel sympathy for him, so it will be interesting to see if we still do when he is the enemy.
I 100% agree with you. I want him to be back with them. But the fact that they didn't do that actually impressed me. And now I'm rooting for this guy. I'm not rooting for him, but I feel for him, and he's the enemy. And that's interesting. That's a three-dimensional enemy. That's not just the twist your mustache and tie the damsel in distress to the railroad track kind of enemy. So I thought that was good. I also thought it was interesting because Goggles, it's not Goggles, it's Tech. I want to call him Goggles because that's what Sid calls him, right? Tech actually had an exchange with Wrecker about Crosshair in front of him, saying how he was always severe and disagreeable. And I thought that was interesting. And Wrecker got to express some feelings about Crosshair as well in the episode. So you could see what his brothers felt about him. I thought that was interesting. Echo really didn't enter into that because he came into the Clone Force 99 later. So he's not one of the original Brotherhood. So I thought that was interesting. I thought Omega had just enough in the episode. Did you feel she was, her character was served right in here? Or do you?
I actually do. I think that in this episode, Omega was better, and I actually have come to like Omega a little bit more. I think sometimes there are points where she can be a little bit annoying, but that's mainly earlier episodes, not really this episode. But speaking of Omega, I think that it'll be interesting in the future, especially if they make a season 2 of this, which I think they will, if Omega will get Crosshairs to come back or something, because they had a pretty good...
They established a bond, but it's like an unfriendly bond in some ways. He's not willing
to go to their side.
Yeah, he's very closed off.
Right.
So it's interesting because I think he feels something, but he won't allow himself to. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So again, I think he's a very interesting character. You love to hate him, but you know, it's very, I find it very interesting. Now, something you pointed out last week comes into play here, which is she is actually older than them. She's a child and she's growing at a normal rate. Their growth rate was accelerated so they could fight in the war. But she's actually older, so that could explain why she has knowledge and skills, but her physical body hasn't developed to the point where she's able to, like, she understands what to do, but she can't always do it necessarily.
Right. And I'm kind of wondering, since she is older, I wonder if she is like her brothers, where she is good at strategy, and one's good at this, one's good at that. Or if over time, because she's been around longer, if she knew how these games worked and the strategy of how to fight and whatever.
Well, we have to wonder what the purpose of her was. She's a one-of-a-kind prototype, it seems, as far as we know. So what was her purpose? Why did they create her? Was she supposed to be a leader? At one point, someplace, I think they said she was from Jango Fett. Her DNA comes from Jango Fett, although she doesn't look like the rest of Clone Force soldiers. So it's very interesting. Also, the ending, at the very end, there's a planet, a shuttle comes in, an Imperial shuttle, and the scientist from Kamino walks off, and there's an officer there that says, "We have big plans for you. We're impressed with your work. We have big plans for you." And that goes back to what we were saying last week about there's got to be something that the Empire is planning with regard to cloning someone else. I don't think they're going to clone, and I don't think they're going to create more clone soldiers, at least from the Jango Fett prototype. Something else is going on here, and I think that could be a very interesting storyline. I feel like they're just starting to set it up, and it's going to be a slow developing storyline on the side of this series.
I agree and I disagree. I agree with how it is going to be another story. I disagree with the choice of the ending. I don't like how they put the Empire's little part at the end. I feel like it was a little bit anticlimactic, but that could be just me, and I do think it was important. And so in one way, I think it should go on the end, but in the other way, I think we should have seen the Bad Batch last.
I don't disagree with that. I'm not going to try to convince you. I'm going to say it's similar to The Mandalorian when they ended with the Boba Fett post-credit scene. They were trying to entice you with what's going to be going on with Boba Fett. I think they were trying to entice us here with who is the Empire planning to clone? Is this going to be the Emperor's clone? What is this? So I think that was interesting. I think it's very interesting, and this is the last thing I'll say, that we are having this much conversation about the Bad Batch and about the Bad Batch's season, because based on where it started, I didn't think we would be this interested or have this much to say about it at the end of the season. So it did grow on me. I felt it got better. I warmed to it as the season progressed. I think they got their feet underneath them as the season progressed, and they figured out how to tell stories and how to balance Omega's part in the storytelling and make sure the Bad Batch was properly served as well. For me, this episode was one to see, and the season went from being one to flee at the beginning to one for free in the middle to one to see at the end.
This episode, I will give it one for free because there were some good parts of it. I just think the majority of it I didn't like. I could be nitpicking. For the whole series, it's broken into two parts for me. I think that the first part, definitely one to flee. I wouldn't check it out. The second half, I would say is one to see. The last episode, this episode, I'm not too sure about.
Well, we'll have to see what season 2 brings. I hope they continue with the type of storytelling that they were looking at, starting with the Hera episodes especially. All right.